Hello, everyone, and welcome to G2's Professional Spotlight series, wherein we cover professional journeys of global marketing leaders and take their insights into marketing trends. My name is Siddharth Yadav, and I'm a senior editorial content specialist at G2. And I'm joined today by Nancy Harhut, who's the co founder and chief creative officer at HBT Marketing. She's also an expert in applying decision making shortcuts that people rely on to marketing messages in order to increase their effectiveness. And this led her to author a book entitled Using Behavioral Science in Marketing. Thank you so much, Nancy, for joining us today. It's a pleasure to have you here with us.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to this.
Same here, Nancy. So before we deep dive into marketing specific questions and know different aspects of behavioral marketing, let's get to know you as a person first. So, Nancy, what's your favorite beverage and when do you enjoy it the most?
Well, so during the day, it's tea, okay, whether it's jasmine or Earl Grey. But on weekends after 5, it would be a good rum with some Diet Coke.
Right. Nancy, could you recall what was your first job and if you had any learnings from it that you still carry with you?
Yeah, well, my first real job after college was working at Mullen Advertising. I was a PR assistant slash copywriter. And of course, I was most interested in the copywriting and least interested in the assistant part. But you start where you start, whatever you can get. And I loved Mullen. And I think that the one thing that I learned was to try to anticipate what my boss would want. So I was there because I wanted to write, but I was also an assistant, and being a good assistant would mean not always waiting to be told to do something, but to anticipate, think of it ahead of time, and be there with the solution before it was even asked for. Not an easy thing to do, but a good thing to do if you can manage it.
Quite interesting, Nancy. So, what's the favorite software in your current tech stack?
Well, I'm a copywriter. I love to write, so I'd have to say it's Microsoft Word. Pretty basic, but it gets the job done.
We've had a lot many variations of Microsoft Word, and there are different products by different companies that have sort of tried to mimic Microsoft Word. How do you have you also like tried those software, for example, Google Docs or things like that?
I,
Uh,
I do sometimes use Google Docs, but you know, I'm I love Microsoft Word. I'm used to Microsoft Word. And like so many people, we use what we're comfortable with. We go back to what's familiar. And so when I'm in Google Doc, it always feels just a little different. And when I'm with Microsoft Word, I feel like I've come home.
right, makes a lot of sense. So we all have those frustrating moments at work, which would want to make us throw the laptop out of the window, not literally, but like figuratively, right? So what would be those moments for you?
For me, it's any kind of a tech problem, and they seem to pop up all the time. I can't connect, or I'm being told I've entered the wrong password, or the screen is blank and it's not supposed to be blank. Things like that. Where it's like, and it always happens at the wrong time. When you're in a hurry, when you're trying to meet a deadline, and there's a problem. You can't access the file you need. You can't get it. You can't log on to the interview or the podcast or the meeting that you're trying to get to. So those are the times when I just want to pick up the laptop and throw it out the window.
And could you briefly describe your professional journey so far and what got you interested specifically in understanding behavioral aspects of marketing?
Yeah. So, I graduated Boston University with a degree in journalism, actually, but I knew I was never going to be great. I wasn't going to be able to make a career out of it the way you're making a career out of it. So, in my last year, I kind of looked around and I saw my peers, and some of them were just really. I knew they were going to be great, and I would be good, but I wouldn't be great. So in my last year, I took all these other writing classes, advertising and corporate communications and public relations. And because I knew I wanted to write, uh, and I was beginning to realize that being a journalist wasn't going to be my calling. So I graduated and I was able to get this job at Mullen Advertising as the PR assistant slash writer. And that just allowed my career to start to build in the idea of marketing writing. So, I went from there to Inc. magazine and I worked in the marketing department. Then I went to an ad agency that's now known as Digitas, but I was there when it was much smaller before it was the big, global marketing agency that it is. And I just continued to work my way through advertising and marketing agencies with a real focus on direct response marketing or one-to-one or, customer relationship management or performance marketing, whatever you want to call it these days, but less about building brands and more about getting people to act, And at one point, a mentor of mine gave me a book called uh, Influence, The Psychology of Persuasion by Robert Cialdini. And that was a game changer for me. And I went down the rabbit hole of behavioral science. I started to learn about all these persuasion techniques. I began to study how people really make decisions, which isn't the way marketers think. In marketing, we think people make these very well thought out, carefully considered decisions. And while that happens sometimes, very often people make decisions just automatically. They have decision defaults that they rely on or decision making shortcuts that they rely on. And they rely on these, shortcuts for everything from whether or not to open an email all the way up to who to put on the short list of vendors that you might be considering buying from. So I don't want to say that there's no thoughtful consideration, but a lot of what leads up to an ultimate action is automatic. And so I started to study that more and more, and I started to apply it in the marketing that I was doing because I was working at agencies and I'd be, reading Dr. Cialdini's book or, Dan Ariely's book or, some other behavioral scientist. And I would say, oh, that would work. That would maybe help me with this client that's a newspaper that wants to get more subscribers, or that might really help me with this client that's an insurance company that wants to get people to buy even more insurance. And so I'd be underlining and highlighting and making margin notes in the books. And then I'd come into the office and I would be writing marketing copy for these clients. I'm going to try this, I'm going to try that. And when it started to work, it's like, all right, I found my calling, I'll never look back now. And so that's taken me to where we are today, where I wrote the book using behavioral science and marketing, and I have the agency where we really focus on applying marketing best practices and behavioral science in order to increase the likelihood that our clients get the response they're looking for in their emails, their landing pages, their direct mail, their social, their content. And so far, so good. It's working.
You've stressed often that using emotional triggers in the human psyche is not just meant for the B2C customers. We should also be applying it to the B2B segment, right? Um, you said that, both B2C and B2B sellers should create emotional connections with customers, right? But at the same time, these segments focus a lot on rational selling points as well. So, Nancy, how do you balance out both of these, the emotional appeal versus rational appeal? First of all, is there a versus between the two? And if not, like, how do you reconcile both?
So the word balance that you just used, that is a perfect word because we want both. We know that people make decisions for emotional reasons, and then they quickly justify those decisions with rational reasons. And they justify their decisions to themselves as well as to the people around them, to their colleagues, to their boss, to their spouse, right? So we want to have that balance between the emotional and the rational. And very often leading with the emotional, which kind of hooks people, and then quickly following up with the rational to provide the reason why somebody does something, is a nice balance. So we want to have both. We want to blend both. It's nice to be able to lead with the emotional because that pulls people in. It solves the problem that they're wrestling with, and then we provide those rational sales points so that they could point to them and justify their decision. So it's looking for that balance. We don't want to go all emotion, but we also don't want to go all strictly rational. A lot of times, particularly in B2B, we think, oh, it's all about the speeds and the feeds and the specs, and if I just provide all the very specific information, people will have what they need to make a decision. And while that's true, they have what they need. There's more to the story, and that more to the story is that emotional component. If I'm going to choose this new solution for my company, will it be easy for me to get through, or will people, push back on me? It's a personal reason, but there's some emotion involved in that. Will I look good? Will my boss praise me? There's some emotion in that. Or, will I risk my social capital? Will people say, why did Nancy ever choose that? It's a horrible decision. You know, I'm going to feel that. I'm not going to like that. Will it take a long time to onboard the company, which means I can't get home to my family and have dinner with them? Or will it be easy so that I have more time to go home, to relax, to spend time with my family. These are all the decisions that are, floating around in the background. In addition to, is this a good solution for my company? What is the price point? Will it be able to, solve our answer our needs, right? So it's finding that balance between, the very specific things that people need to justify the decision and the emotions that are swirling around as they're making that buying decision.
Well, certainly from this, I get a sense that the B2B buyer is not any less emotional than the B2C buyer. But is the B2B buyer, in your experience, more rational than the B2C buyer? What would you like say to that?
So I think that they're forced to appear more rational. So they're forced to have more of the rational reasons. They're forced to um, be able to justify what their decisions are. They feel this need to be able to point to something, to feel that they're standing on firm ground, that they're making this decision, based on all of these reasons. So they may not be any more rational or emotional. People are people, whether we're at home or we're at work, but they may be, when they're at work, forced to appear more rational, forced to have, those reasons that they can kind of tick off and say, well, this is why, and be able to more quickly justify their decisions. When we're making a B2C purchase, we're not always, or sometimes, ever asked to justify that. We buy what we want to buy, and you know maybe no one asks us, well, why did you do that? Sometimes they do, but in business to business, very often we have to justify what we're doing. So I think, we're always emotional, but at work, we're forced to be a little bit more rational, or at least to appear a little more rational.
Right, absolutely. So we recently conducted a survey at G2 and it revealed that the marketing function is sort of leading the way in AI adoption. So it's the function which has led AI adoption vis-a-vis all the other functions. With AI use in marketing, how do you think that is transforming how marketers approach tapping into the consumer psyche?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, AI is moving so quickly. Almost every time you turn around, there's you know, something new, a new evolution, a new thing that you can do. Um, but I think so. I guess there are two things. One is AI is helping marketers to be a little bit more efficient, to crunch data faster, to um, maybe to search information more quickly. But on the other side, it's also affecting what we put into the marketplace, what our messages are. And I think in that area, there's maybe a couple of key things where we can see the impact of AI on marketing messages. And one is, it's, I think, making storytelling more important, because everyone has, their own story, and they can't necessarily, create that through artificial intelligence. You can use AI to help you with your marketing messages, but only you have an authentic personal story about you, about your product, about your brand. And I think that is the age of AI, or the evolution of AI, is really underscoring how important these stories are. We really want to make sure that we have a story that no one else can tell. And I think the other thing it's doing is it's opening the door for a little bit of honesty in terms of where we fall short. A lot of times in marketing, the last thing we want to talk about is where we might fall short, right? We want to talk about how wonderful we are, how good we are, how we're better than everybody else. And, nobody can be perfect. No brand, no product, no service can be perfect, but we don't want to talk about the imperfections. We want to talk about what we get right. But with the growth of AI, it's authentic and refreshing and surprising when a brand, a product, a company talks about an area where maybe they don't excel. And I think this is an opportunity for brands to forge more uh, authentic connections, personal connections, build their brand equity by being very honest, by saying things that you wouldn't necessarily expect them to say, by saying things that the AI generated copy wouldn't be focusing on. Because what it does is it helps us stand out. Because when everything out there starts to sound the same, it's really important that we sound different, that we say something that's going to attract somebody's attention. Otherwise, we're going to blend in. And two ways to get that attention and to stand out from everything else that's out there are to tap into storytelling and to to use what they call in behavioral science the pratfall effect, where you admit a slight shortcoming, uh, and that surprises people, and it also endears them to the brand. It makes them trust the brand more. It's like, well, gee, if they said that they're really good in these 5 areas, but they're just okay in the sixth area, gosh, they're telling the truth. I think I can trust them. I think I like them more because of it. And so I think now the time is perfect. The time is ripe for this kind of approach in marketing.
What are some of the psychological principles of marketing that you see being the least used across B2B companies, but which have like a huge potential?
That's a good question. I think my answer would be the idea of cognitive fluency. And cognitive fluency is kind of a mouthful of a phrase, but what it really means is people prefer things that are easier to think about and easier to understand. And not only do they prefer things that are easier to think about and easier to understand, they have a tendency to judge them to be more truthful, and they feel more confident in their ability to make a decision about them. And the problem in B2B is we often ignore cognitive fluency, and instead we complicate our messages. We use big words, right? Run-on sentences, thick paragraphs. We use acronyms and industry jargon and buzz phrases, and we feel, oh, this is B2B. I'm talking to a professional. They're educated. I have to have my language way up here. I have to make sure that I justify the fact that, this is going to be a very expensive purchase. And as a result, I have to sound very sophisticated. And the problem with that is there are many tests, many behavioral science tests that have shown that people actually prefer things that are easier to think about. It's not that they're not smart. It's not that they can't figure something out, but we're time pressed, and we're dealing with a lot of competition for our attention. And anything that a marketer can do to make things easy for people to grasp, easy for them to understand, easy for them to get a quick takeaway, that's going to help us as marketers ultimately make the sale. And I think that this idea of cognitive fluency is underused and undervalued in B2B marketing. We you know, shift in the other direction when we really shouldn't. We're afraid to simplify things, but when we do simplify things, it actually can work on our favor. There was a study that came out of Princeton University, and they were taking PhD candidates' thesis papers, right? And they took every word that was 9 letters or longer and they replaced it with a shorter synonym. And then they ran this test, and they had some people read the original paper and some people read the paper with the longer words made shorter. And they asked people, to judge the paper and also to judge the author. And what the researchers found was people preferred the papers that had the shorter phrases. They thought they were better written. They thought there was better content, and they judged the author of the paper with the shorter words to be more intelligent. So again, in B2B, sometimes we're afraid, like, oh no, if we don't, use these big words and sound really lofty, we're going to fail. And the exact opposite is true. If we can make that connection, if we can make it easy for people to understand, they're going to prefer it, and they're going to actually rate us as more intelligent.
You touched upon attention economy. We talk about attention spans declining today. What are the principles of behavioral marketing that marketers can use today to tap into those declining attention spans?
Yeah, there's a lot of competition for attention, and people skim and they scan, and if they happen to see something that they're interested in, then they go in and they more fully consume the content. So capturing somebody's attention is paramount when we're trying to succeed in marketing. One thing that we can do is we can use surprise. Right? Instead of blending in, we want to do something that's unusual, that's different, that surprises people. There was a study that came out of the University of Glasgow in Scotland that found that when people are surprised, it amplifies their emotions by 400%. So you may say, well, what does that mean? Like, why would a marketer care about that? Well, when our emotions are amplified, two things happen. One, we focus on the thing that surprised us, and two, we remember it longer. And what do marketers want? Well, we want people to focus on our message, and we want people to remember our message. So anything that we can do to surprise people is a very good thing in terms of capturing their attention. And we can surprise people really in two different ways. Well, maybe three different ways. The first is the words that we use, right? How we create our message, the language that we use, what our headline says, what our opening line of copy says, right? If we say something that people aren't expecting to see, well, that surprises them. The second is with our imagery, with our visuals. If we show something that people aren't expecting to see, if we show something that's different for our category, if we, if we show something that's unusual, that will attract people's attention. And then perhaps the third way is to appear in places that are unexpected. Maybe we don't expect to see a B2B message in a particular media, or in a particular medium, I should say. But if we know that that's where some of our buyers are, that maybe they're there in their spare time, it's a interest of theirs, and we pop up there, that can be surprising. Oh, I didn't expect to see IBM here at this location or in this publication. And so that's another way to surprise people. So I think if we're trying to attract attention, one thing we can do is use surprise. And then I'll give you one other example of what we can do, and that is to use something that behavioral scientists call information gap theory. And that's the idea that if we create a gap between what somebody knows and what they want to know, we know that they'll take action to close the gap. So if we say something that people want to know, they're interested in the topic, but they're not really sure what the answer to the question is, that's something that grabs their attention and makes them go forward, makes them click, makes them open, makes them pursue the topic even further. And a great way to tee up information gap is to use who, what, where, when, why, how, words that you as a journalist are going to be very familiar with, right? And when I was in journalism school, they said use those words because it will attract eyeballs. People want to know the answer to who, what, where, when, why, how. So if you lead your stories answering those questions, you'll get the eyeballs. And it turns out it's the same thing with marketing. If we say, why are so many people now turning to, XYZ brand? What are who are the top five providers in this particular category? When is the best time to change your CRM system, right? Things like that. People are like, oh, well, I don't know. I'm not really sure what the answer. I don't know who the top five are. I don't know when the best time would be. And as a result, there's a gap between what they know and what they want to know, and they take action to close that gap. So that's, I think, a second good way to capture attention.
I think the first aspect that you touched upon, which is about the shock value of marketing messages that we are creating, that is sort of amplified today because of declining attention spans, and that is also sort of nudging marketers to innovate and come up with new ways of marketing because I believe the conventional ways are no more working. Everyone is using them. And with the advent of AI, there is a lot of sameness. And like you suggested, if you really want to stand out, you need to integrate storytelling into it to make a mark in the industry, right? We all know, Nancy, that behavioral marketing is good for business. That if you tap into emotional triggers of consumers, you can get a lot of revenue. I mean, everyone knows this is true, right? We all have a consensus on this. Yet, marketers face difficulty in getting a buy-in from their leaders, right? How can marketers successfully tie, integrating behavioral science into marketing to revenue and build a business case for it?
Yeah, that's a great question because a lot of times there's a desire to inject emotion, but you run up against no, we don't do that. It's never been done that way. This is how we always do it, and so it's hard to convince the powers that be. It's hard to convince someone, no, this is what you should be doing. And as I'd mentioned earlier, my background is in direct marketing or relationship marketing, so we did a lot of testing. It was all about test and learn, put something in the marketplace, and we'll see what the response is. I might think this is going to work. You might think that's going to work. Let's put them both out there, test them, see what gets the best response. And so today, that's an answer that I often give to my clients. It's like, all right, I know you don't think that adding emotion is going to be helpful. Let's just test it. We'll carve out a small audience, we'll do a pilot program, and we'll see. And maybe you're right. Maybe at this particular time, for this particular message, for this particular audience, maybe emotion isn't where we want to go. But maybe I'm right. And maybe it is going to work. But let's not argue. Let's not guess. Let's put it out into the marketplace and let's see what our customers or our prospects tell us. Let's see what they feel works because they're going to vote, based on their action. So my response is always test it. We had a client that made business intelligence software, and that it's a very expensive product. It's a complicated product. What it would do is it would take the data that was siloed in different, well, that was locked away in different data silos, I should say, and it would bubble it up to the top so you could get a full 360 view of all your data. And that was a wonderful thing, because otherwise you were trying to make a decision and you only could see some of the data. You couldn't see it all. And with this product, you could see it all. And so our client just wanted to roll out with a very straightforward message. Now you can unlock the data in your silos so you have a full 360 view. And we said, well, there's probably more to that. There's maybe a little emotion. And so we dug a little bit deeper, and we said, let's put ourselves in the shoes of the executive who has to make these decisions, knowing that they're not seeing all the data. And that executive might very well feel nervous that the decision they made isn't quite right, that if only there was a way for them to see everything, they might have made it a different decision. And if the decision was wrong, it wasn't just their job or their reputation. It could affect everyone at the company. It could affect the company's reputation. It could affect their numbers, their profitability. And so we created a campaign that tapped into that. It was the antacid for a diet of tough decisions, or the delete button for that voice in your head. And we ended up testing that against a much more straightforward, problem solution articulation of the product's benefits. And what we found was we got a double-digit lift in purchase intent when we used the more emotional message. Now, of course, we had the very practical reasons to buy mixed in with the emotional one, but we also had some emotion, whereas the other one had no emotion. It was just all the very practical reasons to buy. So I stand by this idea of testing, because that will give you your answer. And sometimes, the answer will be surprising, and sometimes it will really have a benefit to your bottom line. So it's definitely worth looking into.
So it's essentially a scientific approach where you build a hypothesis and you identify variables and you just put them into operation and then you see how things work out. If companies want to start with integrating behavioral science into marketing, where do they get started, Nancy? How do they bring it into their strategy? And in your experience, when companies try to do this, when they try to implement behavioral science in marketing, where do they go wrong typically?
Two very good questions. So I think, where you want to start is, a lot of times in marketing, we think about why somebody should do what we want them to do, why they should buy our product, why they should subscribe to our service, right? Why they should choose us over the competition. And that makes sense. Of course, we want to ask that question. But the other question we need to ask is, why might they not? All right. We have all these reasons about why they should. But the other question we want to ask is, well, why wouldn't they? Why might they not do what we're asking them to do? And then we want to identify the top 2 or 3 reasons that someone might not want to do what we're asking them to do. Maybe it's they're not familiar with our brand. Maybe they feel they don't need us, that their existing solution is good enough. Maybe they feel we're too pricey. Maybe they feel they can't get buy-in. Whatever that answer is, but we want to think about why someone might not want to do what we're asking them to do. And then we want to look at the available behavioral science tactics that are out there and see which ones are most likely to help overcome that buying barrier. And then we want to put them in the market and we want to test them. If we think that the reason people don't want to buy from us is they don't know who we are, maybe we say, well, we're going to use a campaign that employs social proof, that talks about all the other people just like you who have made this decision. And we'll test that against a campaign that uses the authority principle, that taps into some very well-known authority that the industry that the industry respects. And when people see that, ooh, this authority says my company is good, well, maybe they'll decide to buy from me. So, if we know that people don't really know us, and that might be why they're not buying, let's test social proof, let's test the authority principle, and let's see what kind of response we're going to get. And then the biggest problem, I think, we have when people experiment with behavioral science is they do one test, and if they don't get this incredible response, this big lift in sales, they say, oh, it's not for me, it doesn't work. And it could very well be that they just didn't test enough, or they didn't test the right way. One and done is not the way to do this. It's a nuanced science. It requires experimentation and testing, and really delving into how humans behave. And occasionally we even get like a blowback, an unintended consequence. We use this behavioral science principle because we think it's going to work for us, and it turns out it does the wrong thing. Social proof is a great example. If we know that people do what other people like them do, that's the whole idea of social proof. So, if you're not familiar with my company and I say, oh, a lot of people like you have already bought from us, well, that could work very well. But if I use it the wrong way, if I say, like many people, you might not have heard of us, but let me tell you why we're a good choice. Well, what it's really doing is it's confirming where that person is. Oh, yeah, I've never heard of them. A lot of people haven't heard of them. Therefore, I'm not going to use them. So that would be a social proof backfire. So sometimes it's misusing these principles and getting an unintended consequence. So, the principles are powerful. They are easy to apply, but they do require some experience and some perspective. And so a big mistake is, oh, I tried it once, it didn't work. Don't stop just yet. Go a little bit deeper, try a little bit more, and you'll likely see that response you're looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. The lack of patience and this inclination to, or this inclination to get a black and white response. Almost anticipate a black and white response always, although the response may be in the gray area, is something that marketers need to appreciate a lot. And yeah, with time and effort, definitely they'll get a response that is worth emulating and replicating again and again. What are some of the most powerful and research-based words and phrases that marketers should use in their messaging strategies? If you could give a few examples. And
Sure.
also, why do they work?
So one really good word is the word new, or any of the family of new words. New, now, introducing, announcing, finally, soon. And the reason these work is the human brain is hardwired to seek out news and novelty, because when we find something that we think is new, it activates the reward center in our brain, and that produces dopamine, which among other things is a feel-good chemical. So when we find something we think is new, we get that rush of dopamine, it feels good, and as a result, we're constantly looking for that next hit of dopamine. We want that next, really good feeling. So anytime someone sees something that they think is new, now, introducing, announcing, finally, soon, like, oh, I've just found something that's going to be new. We anticipate that novelty and we get that rush of dopamine. Another great word is the word free. And I know a lot of times marketers don't like to use the word free, but Dan Ariely, in his book, Predictably Irrational, devotes an entire chapter to the pulling power of the word free. And he finds that free produces such an emotional charge in us that we overvalue the thing that's free. So if the item were even, a few cents, we might not be interested. But if it's free, we have to have it, right? So anytime we can offer a free upgrade, or 10 hours of free training, or something for free, it makes us really pay attention and overvalue what that offer is. Another great word is the word you. And a lot of times in marketing, we talk about I, we, our company, our product, model XYZ 243, we're all about ourselves. And that's a mistake because, as we were talking about earlier, people skim and they scan, and there's a lot of demand on their attention. And only when they see something that interests them do they more fully go in and consume content. And when they see the word you, well, the I goes directly to the word you. But when we see the word I, we, our product, our company, we have a tendency to skim right over that. So anytime we can use the word you, that can be incredibly powerful. In fact, I tell my clients we want to use you maybe 5 times as often as we use the words I, we, our, just because you kind of jumps off the screen or jumps off the page and it attracts the eye like a magnet. Another great word is the word because. Behavioral scientists have found that people are more likely to do what we ask them to do if we give them a reason why. And a great way to tee up that reason why is to use the word because. So not only do we ask someone to do something, but we explain to them why they should do it. I think you should really check out our new product offering because you'll find it's very valuable, because you'll find it's very helpful, because you'll see that no one else offers something like that. Just having a reason why. And sometimes it's an incredible reason because no one else has it. If you can say that, great, say it. But sometimes we don't have something that strong to say. But even if we say because we think you'll find it helpful, well, I mean, it's not a huge reason why, but it is a reason why. But just having that word because, having that reason why, increases the likelihood people will do what we ask. And then one final word would be the word imagine. And imagine can be very powerful because two things happen when we ask someone to imagine something. First thing is when I ask you to imagine something, your defenses drop because we're just imagining, right? This isn't reality. We're just imagining. So I ask you to imagine something, your defenses drop, which puts me in a better position to sell you because you're not pushing back against me. You're more open to my message. And then the second thing is when I ask you to imagine something, you create the mental picture that suits you, that's personalized or tailored to you. And when I ask you to imagine, what it would be like to have an extra 5 hours in your day, you create the perfect picture, what you would do with those extra 5 hours. And it might be different than the person next to you or the person next to them. Everyone has their own perfect idea of what they do with 5 extra hours in their day. But when I ask you to imagine that, you imagine exactly what you would do. And then I say, well, our new service can give you 5 extra hours in your day. You're sold because you've already, created that idea of what you would do with those 5 hours, and you've done it much better than I could. I might say, oh, if you had an extra 5 hours, maybe you could get more work done. Maybe you could go home early. Maybe you could spend an extra hour at the gym. I mean, I'd be guessing, and maybe you would like to do that, but maybe none of those things interest you, and there's something else that you would do with those 5 hours. But when I tell you to imagine what you do, you know exactly what you would do. So those are, I think, the 5 words that I would recommend as being particularly powerful for marketers to use: new, free, you, because, and imagine.
Thank you, Nancy. That was really helpful. You earlier touched upon the pratfall effect, especially in the AI age. What would be some of your other top 3 to 5 psychological or behavioral marketing principles that you think are very relevant in the AI age that marketers should sort of double down on?
Sure. One of them is the idea of availability bias. And that's this idea that people will judge the likelihood of an event happening based on how easily they can recall a relevant example. If you're someone who's never flown and I say, how safe is it to fly? Well, you don't have any firsthand knowledge, but you will have an opinion. You'll think of every news story you've ever heard or read that, involved a plane. And of course, most of those would involve plane crashes or engine problems or, hijackings or so, and you would think, oh, it's not very safe to fly. Well, of course, it's very safe to fly. It's just that the news media doesn't report about the millions and millions of safe flights because it's not news, right? But so how do we use that in marketing? Well, before we say to someone, oh, you should buy our product, or gee, wouldn't you like our product? What we want to do is we want to back up and want to get them to think of a time when if they had our product in the past, it would have really come in handy. Or we want to get them to imagine a time in the future when using our product would be really beneficial. And then we want to, make the ask. Then we want to say, hey, how about buying? But we want to first start with this idea of availability bias by getting them to recall a time when, gee, if I were their company, or if I were their customer, rather, if I were a customer of their company back then, I wouldn't have had that problem I had. So availability bias is one, I think, very good behavioral science tactic for B2B marketers to use. Another one is autonomy bias. And autonomy bias is this deep-seated desire that humans have to exert some kind of control over ourselves and over our environments. We don't like to feel pushed or forced. We like to feel that we have autonomy, or what a psychologist or a behavioral scientist would call agency. We like to feel that we're in charge. It's that simple. And a great way to make people feel in charge, to make them feel they have autonomy, is to give them choices. As a matter of fact, some studies show that if you give somebody two choices as opposed to just one, you can nearly quadruple the likelihood that they'll make a buying decision in the moment. Because when you put one thing down in front of someone, here's the one recommendation, here's the one product we're trying to get you to buy, there's no context, there's no way to compare. And so what happens? People say, well, I'll do some research, right? I'll check with my colleagues, I'll Google it, I'll ask around, and then, people get busy, life intervenes, and we don't check with our colleagues, and we don't Google it, and we don't do the research, and the buying moment disappears. But if we have two choices that we put in front of someone, suddenly there's context, there's comparison. It's very easy for people to make a decision, right? It's not a question of do I or do I not want this? It's, oh, which of these two do I want? And which of these two do I want is a much easier decision to make. And the human brain likes to take the easy way out. We like things to be simple. We like things to be easy. We like things to be fast. And so do I or do I not want this is much harder. Which of these two do I want? Much easier. So anytime that we can use autonomy bias, anytime we can give people choices, that can be a very good thing to do. And related to that is something called the BYAF technique. BYAF stands for but you are free. And what behavioral scientists have found is we can tell someone what we want them to do. We can ask them to do it. But then if we follow our requests with a phrase like, but you are free to choose, but the choice is yours, but it's up to you, but it's your decision, we can on average double the likelihood that people do what we want them to do. And the reason is we're just reminding them, we're making it very top of mind that we're not pushing them, that we're not forcing them, that they're coming to this decision of their own accord. They're making the decision. They're in charge. They have the autonomy. So I think those are three really good tactics that we can use in B2B marketing to increase the likelihood people will do what we want them to do. There's no magic wand. We can't always get people to do what we want them to do. We can't always get a 100% response rate, but by using these decision-making shortcuts, we can increase the likelihood that people will make the decisions that we want them to make, the decisions that are good for both them and for our companies and our brands.
Thank you, Nancy. That wraps up our chat with you, and I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. I hope marketers also have a lot of takeaways from this. So, thank you so much, Nancy, for joining us today.
Thank you very much. I've completely enjoyed it.
If you're interested in getting more such insights from industry leaders, head to our blog at learn.g2.com/tag/industry-insights. Thank you so much for watching.